Hi, I'm Krutika, and today's conversation is with Anika. This journey is deeply personal, full of emotions, and one that I resonate with because it's a journey that I too have traversed. Up until today, I've never really shared this part of my journey so publicly, and so I'm somewhat nervous about some of the revelations that are going to come up through this episode. But Anika's courage and her willingness to be so raw and open gave me the space to do the same. This conversation, however, is not about me. It's about the remarkably strong, courageous, and resilient human being that is Anika, and her decade-long struggle to become a parent, which sadly has not happened. Her journey is a stark reminder of the women in society who silently suffer, endure, and stand on the periphery of something that is meant to be a biological certainty. From an ectopic pregnancy to unexplained infertility, rounds of unsuccessful IVF concluded by a hysterectomy, a surgical procedure to remove the womb. Anika has endured setback after setback, yet on each occasion she has rebuilt herself and is finally embracing a life where she has chosen to flourish without limits. This conversation is a reminder to be kind, to be compassionate and understanding of those around you, because you never really know what someone is going through. Hi Anika, so good to have you on my podcast today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you so much for having me.
It's so great to have you, and I am just thinking about an Instagram post that you put up recently about being on the swings. Did you get to go on a swing this weekend?
Yeah, no, I definitely, regardless, I'm always out for my walks in the park, and I kind of look around and go, how many kids are in that area? I don't care, let's go. So, yeah.
Well, just like me, and to be fair, my husband and I did a really long walk yesterday, and we did pass Roxbourne Park, which does have some really nice swings, but there were a bit too many kids there, so we felt a bit too old, and we were like, maybe not this time round, so we walked past it, but do absolutely love a good swing. Now, we've obviously connected online because of, let's say, a shared trauma, if you will, and actually I think for a lot of my listeners who are friends and family also, I think today's conversation might come as potentially a bit of a surprise. There might be some revelations in this episode. Maybe they've speculated things already, because of course, Anika, the journey that you're going to share with me today is a journey that I deeply resonate with, and it will be remiss of me not to acknowledge that, I do really feel for what you've been through, because I've experienced a very similar thing. Now, it's a journey about being childless, not by choice, and that feels like a really loaded label or a statement. So I guess before we even go into just introductions, what do you think of that label? Is that,
like you said, it is quite a loaded title. It's quite a long-winded one as well as a loaded one, and it's quite hard to flow sometimes, if that makes sense. So I think for me, whilst it's a title that associates with who I am now, I would say I prefer to use the title Child-Free. It feels a bit more freeing. Childless means that there's something lacking in your life, and prior to me sharing my journey, I guess I was in that space, whereas now I feel a bit more free to be who I am. So I feel like I've evolved as well as the title has evolved in the process.
I love that explanation. And actually, it's very interesting that you mentioned that childless feels like you're lacking, because do you know what, Anika, I'll be honest, for the longest time, I've felt a sense of that, and actually a sense of shame, that's, feeling ashamed of not being able to do something that so many women do so easily. And I'm sure we'll come on to discuss that in a bit of detail. But before we do, just tell me a little bit about yourself.
So as you mentioned, my name is, you call me Anika, which I absolutely love. But I'm so known as Anika, professional for, I'd say, over 20 years now. Although when you look at me, I look like a 12-year-old, but I actually am a woman in my 40s. And because of the event side of my life, I absolutely love bringing people together. So whether it's family functions, social functions, corporate functions, you name it. And I'd say for the last 10 years, I had my own business, which was called Date Massey, and I'm still known as that. Still to this day, even though I'm not running the company anymore, I'm known as the Lady in Red, or the Indian Cilla Black, should I say, who literally brought the fun back into dating, where people were struggling so hard to meet people in person. I used to run interactive singles events, mainly activity-based events, so people's personality could shine through. And I'm fortunate to say that it literally created so many love stories, marriages, and even babies as well. So really, really happy decade of my life to some degree. But I guess what people don't know is during those 10 years, behind the scenes, whilst I was helping people find love, I was also fighting my own battle of infertility. And to some degree, I would say, without me realizing, I made my business my baby because I couldn't have a child.
Oh, thank you so much for introducing, yourself. And I particularly love Date Massey, the name of your company.
Yeah.
And you mentioned all the love stories that you were obviously quite, a big part of. I wanted to ask you, what's been your love story? I mean, when did you get married and how did you and your partner meet?
It's interesting. Everyone always asks me that. And once they know that I've come from a dating background, they're like, oh, did you meet him at a dating event? The truth is, no, we didn't, because we met 22, we've been together 22 years.
Oh, wow.
So practically half my life. My husband's been part of my life, but we've been married 16 years. So this year was 16 years. We're from the same community, so within the Hindu culture you get like castes and communities. We're part of the same community, and we met at a ball in Coventry, even though we actually live 5 minutes down the road from each other, which we didn't realise. So it was a ball for youngsters in the community to just come and have a good time and meet each other, and it was a kind of subtle like meet and match kind of event, which you don't realise at the time, but I kind of hadn't gone for that reason. We kind of met on the dance floor, realised we loved both dancing, and that kind of brought us together. But I later realised that his brother and my brother were really good friends. So we exchanged numbers, and it's not something I would normally do either, because I didn't used to give out my number that easily. But I think because of the safety net of knowing that his brother and my brother knew each other, I was like, yeah, fine, let's meet up for a drink. And that was it. We just we spent most of the evening together, and it was just a refreshing change in them days just to meet somebody you had something in common with.
And actually it sounds very similar to, I've known my husband for about 20 plus years, because we both met when we were at university. We met actually during Freshers Week, and we didn't start dating until sort of final year university, and to this date he still claims that I asked for his number on Freshers Week, but I always tell him, dude, you chased me. But anyway. Now, obviously, earlier you mentioned that, for the decade that you were so engrossed in your business, you ended up making that your baby because you were silently dealing with your own sort of struggles around fertility. Now, being an Indian, and I can certainly relate, motherhood is it's like a milestone that all of us should be kind of ticking off. And when it doesn't happen, it can feel really debilitating. It can feel like you can feel like a real disappointment, not just for yourself, but for those around you. What I wanted to ask is, was being a mother something that you always envisioned for yourself when you were younger?
I would say from a younger age, definitely looking back, I can remember myself pushing a pram with my dolly in it, thinking, just naturally looking at my mum thinking, oh, that's going to be me, putting a cushion up my stomach, pretending I was pregnant. And I think back in them days, when I look back on it, it wasn't play, it was practice. It was just something you're just gearing up towards. And again, when you're younger, as a child, you're never taught about how babies are born or how the concept happens. You just think it's going to happen. It just happens. But that was my childhood memory that I can remember quite fondly. But as I mentioned, I'm an event planner, so my whole life is about planning for the future. So children was always on the cards. It was part of the plan. And I got married at 26, and I was quite adamant that I wanted to have kids by 28. So the reason being is because by that stage, both our brothers were having children, so I wanted to have children at a similar time so they could all grow up together, the cousins could share memories together, and again, I just assumed it would happen. I just thought, right, give ourselves 2 years, as you always do. You get married, live your life, go on travel as much as you want, and then that's it. When you want to have kids, it will happen. And obviously, sadly, it didn't happen.
Can you walk us through then that journey of trying to conceive and what that was like for you?
How long is your podcast?
We can make it as long as we want, Anika.
It is, like I said, it's been a decade-long story, so it is quite a lot to go through. So like I said, I got married 26. We started trying, and we were trying for a good couple of years, like good 4 years, and nothing was happening. I remember going to the doctors when I was 32, saying, look, we're struggling, it's not happening. And they said, no, go away, just try, you're too young. And I say too young because at that point I was like, look, could I be put forward for IVF? And they said, no, you're too young. Go away, carry on trying. And obviously, this is 4 years into it, so you're disheartened. You're thinking, wow, where else am I meant to go? We, as a couple, started looking into other options, and we kind of decided to go down the private clinic route. So we found this clinic in Harley Street and went to one of the open days, just expecting to understand more about it. And before you know it, scans, tests, blood tests, all things was like moving so fast. And it was a refreshing change for us because we're like, wow, there's actually so much hope here. And, I remember nurses knowing me on a first name basis. They get to know you and your personality. And it's such a vast contrast to obviously being said no to on the NHS to now privately. And obviously the cost factor that comes with it. I was going through my first round of IVF and I was scared, hopeful, you name it, all the emotions that were coming with it. And I remember I managed to get a good egg collection. We had the IVF first cycle, and after the embryos were put inside me, I got the call which said, you're pregnant. And I couldn't believe it because this was our first round. And I was like, hey, how has this worked? So I was overjoyed but disbelieved. And I remember just thinking, I can't wait to ring my parents and tell them that they're going to be grandparents. And realistically, in my head, I started planning my baby shower because that's the kind of person that I am. So we were pregnant, and then at my 8-week scan, I was where I thought I'd be hearing my baby's heartbeat. I heard nothing. I was literally there on the bed, and the doctors were looking back at me, telling me, we know you're pregnant, but we can't locate your baby. And I just remember at that point, the nurse giving me a tissue, and I couldn't figure out why she was giving me a tissue. And it was because she was expecting me to start crying at that point, but it hadn't hit me what was going on. We left the clinic and they just said, look, we can't find your pregnancy. However, if anything happens in the next couple of days, then go straight to A&E. And actually something did happen. So 2 days later, my right fallopian tube burst while I was at home, and I burnt up from head to toe. I was in excruciating pain and passed out, and then I was rushed to hospital, and I was kept in hospital for 2 days while they did more and more investigations, and that's when they diagnosed me with an ectopic pregnancy. So this is when the pregnancy is growing outside of the womb, and it was actually growing inside my right fallopian tube, which then caused it to burst. And I just remember them saying to me that you could die in the next hour because of the internal bleeding. By this stage, my uterus was full of blood, and I was basically being wheeled off into theatre with my husband being left behind to sign all the consent forms. And I was terrified. He was terrified, and I was in theatre for a very, very long time and in recovery, and nobody was saying anything to him, and he hates to admit it, but he actually thought I had passed away because nobody was giving him any information. But thankfully, I survived because I'm now telling you this tale. In one cruel hit, I'd lost so much. I came back into the ward again. I'd lost my right fallopian tube. I'd now lost further chances of us falling pregnant. And now on top of that, the doctors were giving me a death certificate telling me that I was a parent, but I had nothing to show for it. I had nothing to hold, nothing to show. I was just like, how has this even happened? I was deflated. Absolutely deflated. I would say, like, going into the process of IVF as well, you don't really know what an ectopic pregnancy is until you go through it, and even then it's kind of skimmed over. It's written in all the consent forms but never really explained to you. So it's miscarriage, you understand, you hear the terminology whilst people don't talk about it, but an ectopic pregnancy, I had no idea what it was. So that was my first round of IVF, and it was traumatizing, as you can imagine, and I had to kind of rebuild myself and figure out what to do after that. And after taking some time out, decided to do 2 more rounds of IVF. Again, every single round was scary, with caution, and traumatizing, to the extent that now, because I'd had one ectopic pregnancy, ironically, I was now being given a free IVF cycle on the NHS because now I needed to be monitored. So my ruptured tube actually gave me one free round on the of IVF going through the NHS, but because there wasn't much continuity in my medical history, we decided to go back to the private clinic where we felt a bit more cared for, understood. And again, like I said, it makes a difference when they know your name and you feel like you're a person rather than a number. So we did 2 more rounds. Each one, again, very scary, and they didn't work. Sadly, they didn't work. But the irony now was that every round I had to wait 6 weeks and be monitored 6 weeks to make sure it wasn't another ectopic pregnancy. So whilst I should have been happy looking for a smiley face on a pregnancy test, I was actually wanting a sad face to actually know that I was safe. You know, you've been dying to have these moments where you could say you're pregnant, and actually now I was hoping I wasn't, just to save my life. So after 3 failed IVFs, we had to kind of draw a line under it. It was like 3 scary rounds, nothing to hold at all, nothing to show for it. So much money, so much energy, so much pain and scarring that you put yourself through. And it was a really hard realization to walk away from and think, right, this isn't going to work for us. And we were diagnosed with unexplained infertility, being told that IVF wouldn't work for us. So it was a decision we both had to make and say, fine, let's kind of draw the line under it. So yeah, 3 years, 3 failed IVFs, and within that I was also having surgeries as well. So I had a surgery to find out that my left fallopian tube was blocked, full of scar tissue, so that meant conceiving naturally was off the table for us. Another surgery that actually showed that I had quite severe endometriosis in my pelvic area that had spread all along my bowels and my pelvic area, which was causing absolutely excruciating pain. And I remember going through this pain and still running my business at the same time. And one of the events, I was halfway through an event and literally the pain just took over, and it almost crippled me, but I just had to carry on because I had a crowd of 100 people in front of me, and there was no way I could just stop. I've soldiered through. I've put on events and I've helped other people find love, but in the process I was just dealing with so much trauma and rebuilding myself every single time that my singletons had no idea that I was actually battling to get to motherhood, basically. So that was 3 surgeries, 3 failed IVFs, all in 3 years. I then had a 4th surgery, was up to about the left fallopian tube, and on that surgery they actually found that I had large fibroids that were pressing on my bladder and was causing me urine urgency. And I just thought it was just something that as you get older, you always hear, ladies in your 40s, your bladder becomes weaker. But actually I didn't. I had quite large fibroids that were within my lining. So for a year I was monitored to make sure that the fibroids weren't growing and were not cancerous, which thankfully they weren't, but that was a 3-month wait, which was horrible. Then I was presented with the option to have a hysterectomy after we exhausted other options. So that was kind of the final step to have a hysterectomy, which I did, and I went through 2 years ago. So this is now 5 operations in 7 years, alongside 3 IVFs. So my body's been through a lot, but I would say the hysterectomy was probably the hardest because it was a final answer to a decade-long question that I'd been pursuing. But I would also say that in that ending, I actually found a new beginning, which is something I will talk about later. It has given me some sort of closure to some degree.
I am left speechless and almost moved, and everything that you're saying, I feel you, I see you, and you know, it's one of those things that women experience this, and I think there's a stat around 1 in 4 women have a miscarriage, 1 in 8 an ectopic. May not always lead to the ruptured tube that you had, but actually that was something I experienced as well, a ruptured tube, and that was not through IVF, it was actually through a normal pregnancy that I had. And everything you were describing around the fear, you know, that this hour that you had, you know, if you hadn't been in surgery within an hour, that could have been a loss of your life. All of it resonates, and how brave of you to, I suppose, go through what you've gone through and come out the other side. And, you mentioned, an ending of one thing, but a new beginning for another, which we will come back to. But there's just a few things that I'd like to unpack, if you don't mind. I mean, you sort of went through this over a long period of time. How did you deal with all of that emotionally, physically, mentally?
So like I said, I run events. I used to run corporate events as well as running my business at the same time. So I would plan my IVF cycles around them. And I remember one guy coming up to me and said, "Oh, you've had a break, haven't you? Where have you been?" And I was just like, "Oh, I've just had some stuff going on." "Yeah, but we need you." And I was just like, I really felt like screaming at him and saying, "Do you have any idea what I've been going through?" But I couldn't, because the element of my events was all about being fun and showing your personality. And I do remember one singleton asking me, like, "Why don't you have kids?" And I remember saying, "If I have kids, I won't be able to do these events." They're like, "Oh, good. Make sure you don't have kids then." So it's like, you kind of come up against things like that. Insensitive comments, but I get where they're coming from. It was a compliment to some degree that they needed me, but I was just like, you have no idea what it's taken for me, and the split personality that's showing up right now to run this event and be here. But realistically, like I said prior to that, I've got, the endometriosis pain was horrible. You've got all the swelling from IVF cycles, everything, and you just don't feel like a woman when you're going through all of this as well. You just don't feel like this is a natural process. People fall pregnant all the time. Why am I a pincushion now? Why am I a guinea pig in a lab that's trying to make this happen? Immediate family knew, so parents, in-laws, and obviously close friends, but extended family didn't. And obviously with my business, I used to network a lot, so people got to know me. They had no idea this was going on at all. But I did share my story about 5 years ago, and that shocked a lot of people, because people had no idea. They were like, "You always turn up and you're smiling." And we had no idea that behind that smile, how much was going on. I was just like, I was very, very good at playing the clown.
Anika, I hope you don't mind me saying, obviously we've only met relatively recently, I'd say,
Yeah.
but the interactions I've had with you, you are someone who exudes positivity, which is wonderful to see. And in some respects, I can totally also resonate. Even in the midst of everything that I was going through, there are a lot of people that have no idea, the sort of struggle that we've been through over the last few years. And you kind of just paint that smile and you crack on with things. You mentioned that sort of split personality. Are you someone that's also always been optimistic and just therefore don't want to show that side of you that's a little bit more vulnerable?
It's nice to hear that you're saying I'm very positive now. I would say I probably wasn't all along, because when you go through this, and like I've mentioned, this has been going on for 10 years now, you're so used to bad news that you start believing it, and you start believing that this is happening for a reason. I've been chosen for this path. I don't know why, but for some reason it's not working. And no matter how much you put into it, it's just, this is the card you've been dealt, really. And it's a really horrible truth to come face to face with. But yeah, I think for me, I'm known as this funny person that turns up and brightens everyone else's day. But realistically, behind the scenes, I was absolutely a mess. And it is easier to hide it. And I think it is a cultural thing, and it's a generational thing. We've just been taught you only shout about the good things. So if you've got a great job or a promotion, your parents want to shout about it. The whole community wants to shout about it. "Oh, he's a doctor, he's a lawyer," all the rest of it. "She's had 3 kids, she's done this," whatever. But when things are not working, it's like, don't tell anyone. Obviously, there's a privacy element to both me and my husband, but also my family. And I've got to be mindful that whatever I'm saying, other people are going to have my back. And I didn't feel like that. They understood what I was going through. I was also the first person in my family to go through IVF as well. So it was a whole new journey for everybody to understand, a lot to unpack. I remember having to draw diagrams for my family as to what IVF is going to be like, and the injections and the process and everything as well. So it was a lot for them to wrap their head around, but then to also then share that with family. It was just easier to say they're trying and it hasn't happened, or they're still trying. Not even that it hasn't happened, they're trying.
Do you know, the other thing is as well, I don't know if it's something that's quite a common misconception in the Indian community, that they think IVF is this miracle treatment that will just give you that miracle baby. And with IVF and everything that you sort of went through, were you offered any sort of therapy or counselling? Did you seek any of that as additional emotional support to help you through this difficult period?
I would say the two most traumatic times of my life was the ectopic pregnancy and the hysterectomy. And both occasions, I was never offered any support or any counselling after it, which is sad to think back. I think I've just kind of soldiered on, but when I look back on it, and obviously you're asking me this question, it is quite sad to think that within the system, nobody actually said, how are you doing? Not family, but in terms of, doctors, nobody said, how are you doing? Or how do you need help processing this? And I didn't get that support at all. I had to find it myself. I went through bereavement counselling. I think actually helped me to sort of unpack some of the pain that was underneath and understand who I was becoming. I've had to rebuild myself every single time, and your identity changes, your personality changes. I remember my husband saying to me, I just want my wife back, because I've changed. So many versions of me have been there. Like I said, I'm very bubbly. I'm the entertainment. I just didn't want to be that. I couldn't be that. You lose elements of yourself. Your light gets dimmed. It's a horrible place to be in. So I wish I had more counselling, but I never really found a really good fit for anybody that could actually help or understand what I was going through. So even with the ectopic afterwards, I remember joining forums to feel like, somebody might get it. And certain situations I did understand, but some of them were really quite traumatic to read, that I actually found I needed to come away from this. It was actually more detrimental to me rather than helping me. And the same with the hysterectomy. I think what I was finding is that all I was seeing was other people sharing their experiences who were either already mums and had therefore fulfilled their life of being a mum, and therefore hysterectomy meant something different to them completely. No one I knew had been through it at my age in their 40s, so I actually felt really alone then. Probably the most loneliest I've ever felt.
I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Anika. It's heartbreaking that women do have to go through this, and often it can feel like such an isolating experience. And what was particularly moving is the reference you made to your husband sort of saying, I just want my wife back, and how you described the dimming of the light. And that's something that feels, I certainly experienced a bit of that as well. What was it that gave you a bit of light during this tough time? Was there anything you did, any rituals, any sort of support or people that you spoke to?
I would say I started on a self-discovery journey. That's one thing that kind of helped. It needed to happen because I needed to figure out who I was becoming. I found healing in meditation, being able to be still with my thoughts. When I look back on it now, I am a different person altogether, and I have grown through it. But when you're in it, you can't see the growth at all. But the fact that I'm able to now share my story 10 years later, and thankfully not crying about it, it shows that I'm in a better place to talk about it. And I feel like I had to go through it to get to who I want to be now.
So well put. And often, I don't know if you feel this, for me, certainly sometimes it feels like an out-of-body experience, that did it really happen to me? And that kind of discovery piece that you mentioned is so important, right? Because when you're at your lowest of lows, they say the only way you can go is up, right? And you really have to seek that up. Have there been any myths or misconceptions about fertility that you've encountered through your experience that you just wished people would better understand?
Everyone thinks IVF works, but no one actually knows until you go through it how low they are. It's just like, right, there's a solution, IVF should work. But what you don't realise is that behind those successes are stories like mine. So pain, loss, survival. It wasn't always a happy ending that everyone sees. And these are the stories that never get told. It's just like, we went through IVF and it worked for us first time or third time or fourth time. Our stories just do not get told. That's what hurt.
Yeah, and that is, such a shame that that's the case. I mean, the round of IVF that we did, it wasn't successful. And again, the other thing people don't realize is when you've had a round, they'll make flippant remarks like, "Oh, just do it again." And actually, you sort of described earlier just the the sheer pressure that your body goes through with all the injections, the invasive treatment that it is, all the scans that you've got to go through. And sometimes people often think, well, you didn't want it enough because you didn't go through it enough. I mean, did you face any of that as a piece of judgment, whether it was from friends and family around you or whether it was your own internal dialogue in your head?
I think, definitely dialogue in my head. I went through 3 rounds, but whenever I talk to other people, you hear somebody else who says, oh, I went through 4 rounds or 7 rounds or something. And then you start judging yourself thinking, did I give up too quickly? Should I have carried on? But, like I explained, those 3 rounds were not fun at all. They were traumatic. So to put yourself through it time and time after, it takes a lot of strength, a lot of courage to do that, and nobody sees that part. They just see, oh, okay, do another round. And same with the clinics as well. Once you're in, especially with the private clinics, I found that once you're in the system or once you're in the loop of it, it's like you never leave without your next appointment, like being scheduled in. So you don't really have time to think about, right, when's the next cycle? It's like, well, actually, your next cycle's coming up. We need to get this in, or let's do this procedure before we do that round of IVF. So you have to take that time to grieve. You have to allow yourself to step away, or otherwise the clinics will just keep pushing you to do the next round. And one of the other things, so maybe not a myth, but this is the experience that I found, is that these clinics, they will know you on a first-name basis. Like I said, my character used to come across it. So they're, oh, here she comes again, Miss Smiley, Miss Humorous. And that was the only way I could deal with it, was literally by cracking jokes. And so they get to know you really well. But then when it doesn't work, it's radio silence. Like you don't hear from them at all. And then you just feel like, oh, now I'm just somebody back in the system again. Going back to what you're saying, I think, the dialogue you have in yourself is that every time it doesn't work, it's a failed IVF, but you also feel like a failure in yourself.
Did this experience kind of affect some of the relationships around you as well? And what I mean by that is, naturally, Anika, there'll be people around you that are popping 1 kid, 2 kids, they've got 3 maybe. And so when you have a group of friends or family where you're all similar ages and they're going through certain milestones and you're sort of feeling like you're left behind, did you ever feel outcasted or like an anomaly, a misfit? Have you experienced those feelings of being outside the periphery rather than sort of inside?
Infertility it affects every relationship. It affects your body, but it invades all your life, I would say, when you're going through it, because it's so consuming. It's all you can think about. So whilst you may feel included in something, you feel like you're not included in it because you're going through this silently with nobody else knowing about it. Whilst I had close friends around me, it was really difficult because both my friends were pregnant at the time and they couldn't understand what I was going through. That it's hard to talk about what's going on because this isn't just you, it's your partner as well, and the privacy element that goes into it. And this is a very intimate topic. It's not just like, oh, we're talking about our holidays. This is actually right. We're talking about something that should be natural, but now we're talking about sperm counts and egg counts. IVF tests your marriage for sure. It brings a whole new dynamics to your relationship. Whilst we're going through it, I did feel like we were a team because, we're in it together. But ultimately, it was my body. It was me going through it. So the decisions had to be mine as to what I was willing to tolerate, what I was able to go through. And after every round, we'd obviously sit and discuss what we were doing next and then decide, right, what's best and what can I actually handle. But also I felt for him in terms of when we lost the pregnancy as well, family would come round and he'd open the door and they would straight away ask, how's Anika? And they'd walk through the house. No one ever asked how he was at all. He'd lost his baby. He'd lost the chance to be a father. But it was all, the focus was on me. And I get it, obviously, because it has affected my body. But, this was something we were creating for us. But I felt like he got left out of that question or conversation. Generally, I feel like men don't know how to show their grief, talk about it. And whilst I was falling apart, he was trying to hold us together. And I could see it, I could see that he was grieving, but he just never showed that side to me. And that was the way he chose to handle it. But I would say infertility definitely tests your emotions, your strength, and your relationship.
I'm so glad you mentioned the point about the emotions that your partner would have gone through at that point, because it is so easy to think about infertility and the focus being on the woman. But when you're in a relationship trying to have a baby together and it's not happening, it can feel, just as heavy on the partner. So thank you for flagging that. Have you found yourself feeling excluded from certain gatherings, or what I'm trying to get at is I have a lot of family around me, friends who have kids, right? And there's always play dates and there's always kids' birthday parties, and I don't have a kid, so I find myself in some instances, yes, I'm invited to things, but there's often always that kind of niggle at the back of my head, the sort of what if, the sort of I don't quite fit in. There are obviously lots of conversations that center around children. I find myself filling awkward silences by talking about somebody else's child, because that is just the default. Yet I feel that void within myself, at such a deep level that I don't think those around me will ever understand. And so what I'm trying to get at, Anika, is do you feel an element of that when you're in certain social gatherings?
Definitely. I've felt it for years now. I remember being at one event where I knew everyone that was there, but it felt like no matter which conversation I dipped into, it was all centered around kids. So whether it was women talking about their kids, and then I thought, okay, do you know what? I can't really contribute to this conversation. I'll go over to where the men are. Go over to the men. They're talking about pantomimes, family holidays, and you're just like, okay, again, I can't contribute to this. So you stand there and it's almost like a circle, and you're on the outside of that circle. I'm surrounded by lots of mummy friends, and I host events all the time. I love bringing people together, but especially women. And I notice at those events, I almost have to kind of pep talk myself beforehand and say, right, you're hosting this event, you know what's going to happen. It is going to be all around kids, and that's exactly what happens. We get a room full of ladies, and the conversation all gears towards kids and the issues that they're having, or the tantrums they're having, and the fact that they've had to take out a couple of hours of their day to come to this event, and what it's taken to get to that stage. And I, as an event planner, I actually plan around them. So I think, right, I'm going to host this event, and I'm going to do it at a time that's convenient for them. So I find I'm accommodating for them, but I don't feel like it's reciprocated. So when I'm in a room full of women talking about their kids, no one ever asks me, like, what's going on in my life? Or if it is, it's always said with a bit of envy, like, oh, right, when's your next holiday? Or, oh, you must be on another holiday again, or something like that. And holidays, I see as our achievements now. It is the way we're designing our life. Holidays are our sanctuary, but when I do talk about holidays, I feel like I'm met with envy rather than connection, or I sound like I'm bragging, so then I don't say anything, and I again dampen my thoughts and go quiet, and I sit there and I listen, and you do come away from it thinking, I've just hosted this event, or I've just been to this event, and I've come away from it more drained than uplifted. And it is quite hard, because you want to talk about your life, or you want to talk about your experiences, but when you're in a room full of mums, it's very hard to bring up your struggles to become a mum. And if you do, you're always met with, oh, but my friend went through surrogacy, there's always opinions, and there's always, well, this happened to this, or why don't you adopt? That comment alone, it hurts so hard, because it almost diminishes everything you've been through. It's like, well, like how people think IVF is a solution, adoption is another solution. And I get it that they are just trying to suggest another option, but I think they think that you haven't thought of that option. You clearly have.
And that's it. People that haven't been through what we've been through often have no clue the impact of the words that they sometimes use, and we silently suffer, and we have a level of empathy where we don't want to put the other person in an awkward position, and so we tolerate. I want to ask, if there's someone who's listening to this, potentially going through what you've been through, what advice would you want to offer them?
I would say, I fully get that it is very hard to share your truth, as you will obviously understand. You're sharing elements of your story today, but it's probably taken you some time in yourself to be able to even share snippets of it. And I remember looking at posts years ago or wanting to post something. I remember Wave of Light comes out every year for baby loss. I would always do it. I still do every year. And, they encourage you to share your post. And I remember the first time I shared it, I didn't write anything about baby loss, but I remember just the hashtags. I was trying to send a message through the hashtags, but without sending it. And there was that, that fearfulness. I want to share this, but you can't because of judgment. But what I have found is that by me sharing, like I said, 5 years ago and even now, there is so much relief that comes from it. I cannot explain the shoulders that drop within you, the connection you feel with other people as well who resonate with you. Classic example, it allowed me and you to meet just by me being honest about where I've come from. One of my regrets is probably before my hysterectomy, I chose not to tell too many people. The reason being is obviously it was such a heavy decision for me to make, and I'd finally come to terms with it. I did not want to then tell people who extended family or friends and be swayed by someone's opinion that, oh, you're too young, what are you doing? So I chose not to tell people before the operation, but what happened is that made it harder for me afterwards, because it's not something you can just bring up in conversation at all. Post hysterectomy, it seemed there were so many social functions happening, which I thought, oh, I'll be okay by then. And the reality was it took me over a year to recover fully. So I had to keep coming up with excuses, and that became heavy on me, and the pressure was building up. And I wish if I had just told people beforehand, it would have made it much easier. I used to go through panic attacks, literally. The minute something would come up, I felt there was a lot of shame and guilt as well after the operation. Whilst I'd done this and it was my choice and I'd empowered myself to do this, there was still a lot of shame and guilt. Men especially didn't know how to look at me, talk to me, and that I found that quite hard. And then I was questioning. I was like, have I done the right thing? I know now I have, but at the time you're very fragile. But one thing I would say is that you don't have to share your truth to everybody. I'm not telling you to shout it from the rooftops, but have a response in you that you're happy with. Like just one word or one line that you feel comfortable with, that gives you the power to have and to say, because then you control the narrative, and then all that overwhelming overthinking just like dissolves, because right, okay, somebody asks me anything, I'm ready with my response.
How powerful. What a great bit of advice, and I wish I had that bit of advice sooner, because
not easier. It's not easy.
No, it's not. And it's only of late that I've been embracing my truth, as it were, and it's all come about because I have had random people or colleagues ask me about children, and previously I would just brush it under the carpet and waffle or say just enjoying myself too much, or making a joke of it. But I'm like, actually, I shouldn't hide from my truth. And there's such a powerful thing to embrace your truth and have that one sentence that you could say, even if you're not going to be asked, like you say. Earlier you mentioned this fertility journey that you've been on, obviously the closure with your hysterectomy, that's kind of an end of a chapter, as it were, and there are new beginnings. And one of the final questions I ask to all my guests is, what journey are you on next?
As I just mentioned, there is so much power in being truthful and being who you are. And since sharing my journey on social media, and then also earlier this year I shared it on BBC Radio 5, they were talking about hysterectomies, and that was the first time I actually shared publicly that I'd had a hysterectomy. So prior to that I'd kept it all to myself, but there was something in me saying, do you know what, I need to share this. So there was a real powerful shift that happened to me earlier this year, and I feel like it allowed me to no longer be defined by loss, and now can fully embrace who I actually am. And what I noticed was also, as I started being more honest and telling people I can't have children, I started seeing more and more women around me who were also in a similar situation. And I felt like, do you know what, I'm now in a position where I can be a voice for those who are still trying to find their voice, because I know, like I said, that was me years ago itching to say something, and now years later I'm in a position where I'm now openly talking about it on your podcast. But it takes time, and it takes courage, and it takes a lot. So I don't expect it to happen overnight. And, some people are happy to just keep it to themselves as well. which is fine, but I would say find an outlet that can help you, because don't bottle it up. It doesn't help anybody. We are now designing the life that we want, and we're no longer focusing on what's missing. We're now looking forward to what can be. So there are now new opportunities that are coming up for us, whether it's to work abroad, go on different holidays, try different experiences, unapologetically living our lives in our 40s. I now feel like I want to create a group of women similar to me, so I don't feel like the singled out one. I want to create that group. So I want to bring together women who are also child-free or who've chosen not to have children, and learn from each other, because it's so inspiring to hear. Some people are mentors, some people like yourselves are running a podcast, some people are traveling abroad, all sorts of things. And you actually see that life can be fulfilling when you don't focus on what you don't have and what you do have. So I've now created this group, which is called Flourish Without Limits. It started as a Instagram page where I'm openly sharing my journey. It's helping me to heal, but it's also helping me to connect with other women who've also been through a similar journey like yourselves. I just know that there is so much strength when you come together as a group where there's no expectations. I no longer feel guilt for not being able to be a mother. I know that I've tried everything within my power to be a mother, and for whatever reason it hasn't happened, but it's allowed me to become this version, and maybe this was my purpose, to create a group of women who can flourish without limits.
That sounds incredible, and thank you for allowing me the space as well to share a bit of my journey, because I don't think I would have without having connected with you. So before I get too emotional, thank you so much, Anika. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on my podcast.
Thank you for listening to my journey. I know it's not been easy to listen to. You've allowed me to claim back some of my power, so thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Journeys with Krutika. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and share. I'd love for you to hit the follow button wherever you get your podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you have a journey that you want to share, email me at journeyswithkrutika@gmail.com or reach out via my socials. I'm on Instagram and TikTok. Just search Journeys with Krutika, because your journey is extraordinary.